Welcome everybody to this event looking at the response to the review of adult social care. We're really glad to see so many of you joining us. We've got a really good mix of people here today. I know there are people who are in the third sector who deliver services. I see people here who are organisations in academia. I see people from our NHS and social care backgrounds, and I know there are some people that I don't know, but I know that there's a number of people here as well who draw on social care as well. So it's hopefully a really good mix of people that are taking part today. In joining the room, you will have come in on mute. If I can ask people to stay on mute while we have the speakers, it just means that everyone's call quality is as good as possible. There is, though, a chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. We're probably at the point that everyone's quite familiar with Zoom, just to be aware, there are some features there. You can type messages in that chat, and I would encourage anyone to introduce themselves and say hi. Feel free to do that. There are also the function for a couple of functions in the participant section where you can ask speakers to go faster or slower if that's helpful. So if you would like a speaker to take their time, or indeed you can raise your hand in there as well if you want to come in. But I'm not going to take anyone coming in until after the speakers have finished, just to give them their time to do that. So I'm going to begin very shortly with a short video from Weekday Wow Factor. But before I do, just obviously this is a really quite feels like a quite positive time for social care in Scotland. I think a number of us have reflected for a while that social care isn't necessarily achieving for people what we should expect it to. So personally, I found the review process and its findings helpful. I think there's still an awful lot of detail to understand about what comes next, and really this conversation is to begin a bit of a conversation for us around understanding how people feel about the review, and also that what the next steps might be. So I'm not going to speak more than that, because as I was saying to colleagues before everybody else came in, I don't like public speaking, which is horrendous for somebody in my job. But I am going to start this video, and that means I have to use technology at the same time. So fingers crossed this works. And Sheena, I can see you on my screen. So if this isn't working and people can't see that, please wave. Yeah, excellent, thank you. There is sound, but it takes a while to come in.
Don't get me wrong, the home care system's a fantastic thing, absolutely fantastic. But the things that the girls can do is limited. As I say, my daughter does it. They're only allowed to do personal care. If people need washing done, their dishes done, or whatever, they've got to pay extra for it, when I think it should be part of the service.
More money should be put into services to help. There's the home helps, there's the people that go around to supposed to clean houses. They're supposed to look after the elderly, clean the houses, feed them, give them their tablets, but they're in and out the houses in minutes because they've not got enough time.
Limited amount of time that care home helps are allowed to go into the houses, and I would like to see that if it be extended.
It's the same as the alarm system when they're elderly. They've got these the alarms that they wear on their wrist or they're wearing around their neck. Now, they used to be free, but now they're charged for that. So not everybody's got it,
And I pay every year, and I'll keep doing it until the day will come out. I will need it. You press a little button that goes through to an office just not far from here, and they send for someone, or they come up and assess your condition, because I've had to use it several times.
But if they're to pay for it, a lot of people will no pay for it, or maybe not get the money to pay for it. So it's putting people at risk.
Personally, I think it should be compulsory. Everybody, a certain age, it should be put in voluntarily, whether you want it or not. Just put it in, and instruct people how to use it and when to use it if you fall. And that little thing is there to buzz for help immediately.
They should put something in place where home helps are given longer time to spend with people, or they could be supplemented by some sort of befriending system, so that you get your home help in to do the basics, but you do have somebody that sees you for a social visit on a social basis.
Don't get me wrong, it is a lot better for people that can stay in their own home. But I think they get lonely. I think they could do even more kind of home visits, kind of friendly, no kind of befriending things.
There should be someone keeping an eye on who lives alone, and they should check up on them. Just have someone to do that job, 1 or 2 people, to make sure that people are safe in all aspects. And there should be services put in place to help the elderly.
And I mean, I know people that stay on their own, it's got carers coming in. In fact, one woman I know in particular, Helen, and she looks forward to her carer coming in because that's the only company she's got.
Setting up organisations that have Zoom calls to prevent loneliness, to prevent people feeling suicidal. So the solution isn't just, oh, if you're feeling suicidal, ring the Samaritans. It's, hey, join in with this Zoom call, or, you know, reach out to people.
This should be a free service given to people that are lonely. And surely to goodness, outside in the big wide world, people know who are lonely. There is ways of checking. They shouldn't have to sit alone and not speak to anyone, because a lot of poor wee souls, they just sit on their own. They really have nobody. But then we are lucky because we have this with you, Pastor. You are a lifeline to a hell of a lot of people. We can come on Zoom 6 days a week. We can call you anytime, and that is great. There's a lot of people who really, really need this.
Once the organisation is in place, as in Weekday Wow Factor, you do find word of mouth gets round, and it is growing because people are saying, you know, women are saying, oh, we enjoy doing this, so, you know, give it a go.
The prime example is Wow Factor, you know, because to me it's a godsend. It gets me, there's days when I could just stay in my bed and feel sorry for myself, and it gives me the incentive to get up, get myself dressed, tidied up, and to face the day. And there's so many interesting things, and meeting, you feel as if you've got friends in your own sitting room, you know, and we've got to know each other, and there's an air of confidentiality about it as well, because you know that you can open up and it's not going to go any further.
It's a really nice start to today, and thank you to Weekday Wow Factor for making that for us over the Sorry, my YouTube kept playing after after I stopped sharing it. So what's that noise? So yeah, really interesting start, and thank you to Weekday Wow Factor. Obviously, we wanted to hear some voices from people who draw on social care as part of today, and then approaching them, a number of them felt that they would be more comfortable doing that in a pre-recorded way, which I think that's worked really nicely to kick us off. We now have 2 speakers to take on next. The first is Annie Gunnar-Logan, who I usually think of as requiring no introduction, Annie, but I will give you a short one, Annie. Annie is the Chief Executive of CCPS, which is the organisation that represents third sector social care providers across Scotland. And then after that, we have Professor Ian Cunningham from the University of Strathclyde, and Ian is going to do give us a little bit of a perspective from his work, looking at the workforce and contracting in social care as well. They'll both speak for about 10 minutes each, and then we will take Q&A on those If people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. My colleague Lynn is going to try and curate them so that we get the best use of that time. So I'm not going to speak anymore. I'm just going to invite Annie to unmute herself and share her reflections on the review and views on the way forward. Annie.
Thanks very much, Ian, and thanks, Lynn, for the invitation. And hello, it's only Tuesday and I am already losing my voice. So this is called Zoom throat. I think everybody will recognize it. You kind of speak a little bit differently into these machines now than you would if you were sitting around a table, but let's go for it. I've got my cup of tea here. So thanks very much for the invitation. I've been asked to share my thoughts on the independent review of adult social care from a third sector perspective, and I'll try my best to do that. But some of those attending will know that my kind of slice of the third sector is quite a specific one. My organisation, CCPS, is the national voice for the care providers. So these tend to be the registered care providers, right, whose services are at the more formal end of the spectrum, registered with the Care Inspectorate, delivered by staff who are registered with the Scottish Social Services Council. And I will be the first to tell you that there's more to the third sector than that, for sure. So let's acknowledge that right up front. There's a whole world of third sector activity which is relevant to social care, which wouldn't necessarily be encompassed by my own organisation, but that's the beauty of attending a GCVS event, because GCVS's membership is much more concerned with those other organisations. So there's a kind of double act going on here. So I certainly won't be pretending to speak for everybody. Somebody once said to me, Annie, just stick to what you know. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Often ignored that advice, by the way, but not today. So the other thing to say is that I'm still digesting this report and these recommendations. You know, there's a lot in there, and it was released, I think, on the 3rd of February, so it was only a month ago. And I've probably read it 3 or 4 times now. I shall read it some more, and I shall find some more stuff in there that I didn't notice the first time, and start to really kind of think through what this means. What it means for, obviously, the organisations that I represent, but most importantly, what it means for people who rely on social care. And so I'm not kind of ready to issue definitive pronouncements, you know, this bit is good, this bit is bad, because we're all still thinking it through. And I think this kind of event is really important for that, because I am as interested in what you all think about it as any assumption I might make that you're interested in what I think about it, because one of the absolutely central themes to the report, I think, is that we have, whatever happens, we have to do it together, and we have to do it collaboratively. This isn't about somebody just kind of picking up and running off with it and implementing it, and then all the rest of us sit back and wait for it to happen. So this kind of event, you know, the more of this that goes on, the better. And our own membership is having a meeting on Thursday where we're all going to kind of get into the guts of it and see what we can make of it. So those are my kind of 2 caveats, really. And I think whether you're raving about it as being a work of genius, or whether you think it is the work of the very devil, there are some gaps to be filled in either way. And so, you know, this event is part of filling those gaps. So I'm kind of casting my mind back to September when it was announced. Time has taken on a very strange quality over the past year, hasn't it? But somehow it seems much longer ago than 6 months that the review was announced, but there we go. And it was announced 1st of September, and I'll be absolutely honest, we were a bit worried about it. Okay, the Scottish Government was already 18 months into a programme of adult social care reform. A range of work streams was already underway, including one on commissioning and procurement, which my organisation was facilitating. You also had the Health and Sport Committee of the Scottish Parliament, which was slap bang in the middle of their own parliamentary inquiry into adult social care, to which we had already submitted evidence. And this review just kind of went, sort of leapfrogged right over all of those processes and plonked itself down in the middle of them. So we were thinking, you know, this has come in over and above all this work, and we weren't quite sure why, other than the fact that COVID-19 had happened in the meantime. And so the review, part of the worry that we had about the review was that it seemed to have arisen as a direct result of COVID and what COVID had brought about for adult social care. So just kind of running through, you know, what did COVID do? Well, first of all, it led to a very rapid overnight removal of some people's care packages, you know, quite a lot of people's care packages, actually. It exposed very sharply the consequences of treating the third sector as a supplier rather than a partner, which led to all the problems we had in accessing PPE and the lack of support for service sustainability and workforce shortages, all the rest. It brought the huge tragedy of care home outbreaks and deaths, and again the exposure of the systemic issues underlying that, in particular the very poor treatment of the care home workforce. And I think it also brought a very stark realization for ministers that although they were held accountable for all of this, they didn't have the degree of control over it that would have allowed them to do much about it, both because of the governance arrangements that place local authorities and IJBs very much in control of social care, and because most of the services are in the hands of non-public sector employers who have been encouraged to compete with each other and not cooperate with each other. So that's the kind of context in which the review landed. And so all of that gave rise to the talk of a national care service. And I was here, I think in November with GCVS and EVOC talking about that very thing just last November. So our immediate concerns were, this is coming over the head of everything that's already been going on. A narrative is already developing as to what the preferred solution is, i.e. national care service, and the whole thing is going to be focused on care homes and or the perceived evils of the private sector and a bid for nationalisation. So if you add to that the timing, where Derek Feeley was only given 4 months to do all of this, conveniently reporting in time for an election manifesto, plus the fact that nobody on the advisory panel seemed to have any direct experience of social care at all, I think it is fair to say that some of our brows were fair to middling furrowed about this. Nevertheless, we saw it as an opportunity, and we put in a very detailed submission, and in which we asked for a number of things. Firstly, we set out what we think social care is. The big clue there being it is not a service to be provided to people who can't manage. It is a vehicle that helps people to get to where they want to be. So, you know, the destination of social care is not to give somebody 20 hours of support a week. The 20 hours of support a week is the vehicle through which they arrive at their destination. So that was absolutely our central point in our submission. We asked for a reset of the whole system rather than just tinkering about with bits of it. We asked for an interruption to the cycle of procurement and commissioning, whereby we continue to commission what we've already got because we have constructed a system that tells us that that is what people need. We asked for a turbocharging of self-directed support because we felt that it had not really been delivered or implemented in the way that we all envisaged way back in 2013, and we legislated for it. We asked for more streamlined and accessible accountability arrangements, and we asked for somewhere for people to go to challenge decisions that didn't involve court action, because that seemed to be the only place that people could go. We asked for more financial transparency so that we all understand what resources are being committed to social care and what they are then being used for. 2 parts to that. We asked for an end to the 2-tier workforce, where council employees get good terms and conditions, but not many other people do, and for the wider Fair Work agenda to be implemented. We asked for collaboration to be hardwired into the system. You know, not just joint working between organisations that like each other, but an end to competition. And to help with that, an immediate pause to all routine tendering activity. We asked for a Bill of Rights, because people's rights, the people who use social care, their rights are scattered through many different kinds of bills and policy documents and bits of legislation. And we thought, well, let's bring all that together. And we asked for an increase in and an acceleration of the degree of choice and control offered to people in how their support is provided and by whom. So that's what we asked for. So what did we get? Well, to be honest, quite a lot of that. Quite a lot of that is what we ended up with. in the report and the recommendations, and many of our fears that I described to you before about, was this a stitch up? Was it something that was too conveniently timed? Was it too short? A lot of that went away when we actually read what was in the report and the recommendations. The National Care Service that is being proposed here is not, as we thought it might be, a bid for a nationalised care service. That is everything then being delivered by the public sector and the third sector and everybody else being squeezed out. Now, not everybody is pleased about that. There are some people who want that and will pursue that, I dare say, but we're not one of them. And from a third sector perspective, I cannot help but be delighted by the very, very clear recognition in the report that when it comes to high quality social care, then you find that in the third sector. Predominantly, you find that. I mean, there's good and bad everywhere, but overall, in aggregate, this is where you come if you want high quality support that involves people and offers people choice and control and all the rest of it. So that was fantastic to see, and that there wasn't any suggestion that somehow we didn't have a place here or that we would have to transfer services back into the council or whatever. So that was a huge worry that we had, and there is absolutely no basis for that in the report as it was published, which is brilliant. The importance of implementing self-directed support, like properly implementing self-directed support, is there. The revolution in commissioning and procurement that we wanted to see is there. The emphasis on collaboration that we wanted to see is there. The Fair Work agenda is there. So a lot of my boxes, if you like, were ticked. But perhaps the most important thing is the stuff that's in there about changing the narrative of social care. What's it for? Who's it for? Who is it supposed to be for? Who should be in charge? All the stuff about human rights and rights-based approaches, all the stuff about prevention and early intervention, and all the stuff about the people who rely on care and support being squarely in the center of all this. Now, we have talked a good game about that for decades. But here we have a set of proposals which are intended to bring it about. Now, there are some doubts out there, I know, and some reservations about whether they will. And there are already some discussions being held about the particular role of local government, for example, in this, because one of the interest groups that really didn't like some of this was local government. So from our perspective, as I said at the beginning, there are some gaps that need filling for sure. How is some of this going to work in practice? The links with children's services, the links with criminal justice, the links with housing and homelessness still need to be drawn in detail. There's a very distinct lack of any kind of reference to the role of digital technology in social care, which was, even a couple of years ago, all the roads going to solve all of our problems, digital. And that's hardly mentioned at all here. So another bit, which is certainly not my area of expertise, but there's been quite a lot of commentary about whether the section on financing adds up, whether the numbers in it add up, and the kind of fiscal implications for all of this. But as attendees today may know, the suggestion that everything would be all right if we just put more money into the existing system is not one that I agree with at all. Our view on that is a resounding no. A lot of the problems that the review identified, that we all fed into the review about, rigid procurement, absence of rights-based approaches for people, gatekeeping, all of those things, they were around long time before money got tight. They have always been a problem. And so the idea that you can just sort of inject a lot of cash into the system without changing it at all, and suddenly everybody's problems will go away. No, we don't subscribe to that one at all. So I'm probably running over my 10 minutes, Ian, so I'll wrap up by saying, that we are very, very encouraged by what's in the review, very encouraged by the extensive engagement that the chair and his team had. One of the things we worried about was that 4 months was too short a time, but my goodness, they used it well. And what they did do was they didn't try to duplicate the mountains of evidence that already exist about this. They actually read it. They read it and they understood it and they played it back. So when I got the email that had the document attached on the 3rd of February, and it was an email from Derek Feeley, and he said, I hope you see yourselves. I mean, he didn't just say it to me, he said it to everybody who fed into the review. He said, I hope you see yourselves in this report. And my response to that was, yes, we do. Yes, we do see ourselves in it. And we were very pleased to have played a part. So that's my 10 minutes, I think. Ian, I'll stop there, and really, really interested in hearing what everybody else has got to say. Thank you.
Cheers, Annie. Thanking you. That was great. Lynn is rapidly correcting me that we have plenty of time for you to speak. So hopefully, if you want to continue, you can, Lynn. But that's great. Sorry, Annie. That was great and a brilliant start. Thank you very much. Gonna bring in Ian Cunningham. I know, Ian, you've got a PowerPoint presentation, so feel free to start the process of sharing it while I do your introduction. Ian, Professor Ian Cunningham, I should say, is Professor of Employment Relations at the University of Strathclyde in the Department of Human Resource Management. He's an academic fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and he has extensive research interests that particularly include voluntary sector employment relations, and a strong background in social care as well. So really keen, Ian, to hear what you're saying. That looks like your slides are ready. So whenever you're ready, take it away.
Okay, thanks. I apologise if I've cut Annie short. You know, I think there was some mix up there, but it's great to be invited along to this particular event. I'm really pleased that I've been asked. What I want to do is a couple of things and focus on a couple of issues. I was asked to kind of reflect on the review of adult social care and reflect from the point of view of an academic and also the research base that's out there, especially the research that myself and colleagues have been involved in for the last 15 years. Much of the research, or certainly a lot of the research, has had links with CCPS and Annie. So I'll be drawing on that to kind of reflect on the lessons from that research and how I believe it kind of connects with some of the core recommendations around the review of adult social care. And like Annie, I'm still digesting this. And this is my first reflection on this. And in doing so, what I've done is I've picked out two broad issues from the review. In particular, I'm interested in the implications for the proposal with regard to fair work, obviously, but also the establishment of what they call national collective bargaining. I found that quite intriguing. And secondly, I think just some general observations from the research we've been undertaking and the implications for the review with regard to kind of purchaser-provider relations, commissioning, procurement, the whole kind of outsourcing agenda. What does this mean? And what does the research we've done on previous smaller scale efforts to reform social care, what lessons from that can we draw and bring into our understanding of what is the best way to go forward with this set of recommendations under the review? I'll just say very briefly about the research that's been undertaken over the last 15, 16 or so years. It started with my own PhD, which at the time I got a sense of organisations struggling to care. In other words, to kind of deliver the types of outcomes that Annie talked about, that way of getting people to a point in their lives where they want to be. And organisations, even though the funding situation was better, outsourcing and the nature of purchaser-provider relations and the tight squeeze on resources meant that organisations did struggle. And I think that struggling concept is intensified and been accentuated over the years. And This will be familiar to some people, including Annie, in terms of like the themes we looked at. We looked at, for example, the impact of austerity on public expenditure and terms and conditions in the voluntary sector. We did something on re-tendering and the voluntary sector, and then again on implications for terms and conditions, workforce attitudes, and the purchaser-provider relationship. Separately from our work with CCPS, we've also done quite a few projects on unionisation in the sector. As SDS took hold, and as Annie said, there's been problems with the kind of implementation of that particular measure over the last 10 years. We've been involved in about 3 or 4 projects that have tried to explore why that's the case, but also, again, because I'm an employment relations scholar, we always return to the workforce. And more recently, as the Scottish Government has certainly realised that social care is important and the workforce is important and undervalued, we've seen more progressive measures being introduced at national level, such as the implementation of the Scottish Living Wage. And again, we were commissioned to explore the issues around implementation. And finally, almost about 18 months ago to 2 years ago, we began to see the consequences of the dysfunction, I think, in this marketised approach to care, where there seemed to be the emergence of an unravelling at local level of local markets. In other words, the very organisations that were labelled as innovative and the ones that were delivering the best care, the voluntary sector, they began to discover that their contracts, their way of delivering contracts was unsustainable, and they began to hand them back. And this seemed to be a culmination for us in terms of like the outcomes of this whole period of 16, 17 years of these organisations, as I said at the very beginning, struggling to care, struggling to get people to those places in their lives where they wanted to be through those 20 hours of intervention by these organisations. So we were I was intrigued by the whole independent review, and as I said, I've just read it a couple of times, and I've started on the bits that I feel as though I can kind of at least ask questions about, and ask questions about, well, how are you going to go about this? What are the issues? And the first one I was looking at and felt drawn to was the issues around national collective bargaining. In other words, in a bid, I think, and this is one of many bids in the last few years, to end the so-called race to the bottom in terms of conditions and solve the crisis of recruitment and retention in many of our organisations in the voluntary sector. One of the proposals put forward is to build in fair work into the agenda of the National Care Service, and alongside that introduce national collective bargaining. Now, this means for the sector that's not heavily unionised, this implies greater engagement with unionisation in the sector, and that's not without controversy. And what I wanted to do is just maybe give an overall summary, first of all, from the research about, well, what's happening with unions in the sector. We know that national collective bargaining has never been in the sector beyond the phenomenon in the early years of outsourcing, of the regulatory reach of public sector unionism, reaching into the voluntary sector, where voluntary organisations took on terms and conditions that mimicked the public sector. And this meant that there were broadly similar salary scales, pensions, sick pay, etc., holiday entitlement. But certainly, even in my early years of studying the sector, this was beginning to unravel. The whole kind of like race to the bottom, the starting pistol began even under New Labour, as the more services were demanded for the same, or in some cases even less money. And this was this shortfall, when it wasn't being met from voluntary sector reserves, as we know, meant that there was a kind of cutting and an unravelling of the link between voluntary sector terms and conditions and that of the public sector. And this marketisation, or this gradual marketisation and gradual unravelling, meant that certainly by the time things like austerity began to hit the sector, from 2010 onwards, this unravelling began to accentuate and exacerbate. and really take hold, to the point where, you know, some organisations were reduced to making quite savage cuts in their, you know, our pay rates to various grades of staff, including those at the front line. So this begs the question: once that kind of regulatory reach from the public sector diminished, what were unions doing? Well, there was things like the SCVO, TUC kind of meetings that periodically occurred, and we had a statutory framework from the UK government that allowed unions to seek recognition. But what it meant was that most links and engagement with the unions occurred at the level of the workplace, the level of the voluntary sector enterprise, and this, in many respects, reflected other areas of the economy. In other words, union activity, unionisation rates were low, struggling to kind of like re-emerge and recover. Density was low, and part of the reason was the problems recruiting stewards, activists at the workforce who could be, if you like, the kind of beacons for other members to join. And again, the nature of voluntary sector work doesn't make it easy for unions to organise. It's fragmented. There's no traditional factory gate like there is in manufacturing. Irrespective of these problems, the unions can claim some success of having a presence in the workplace, certainly above some private sector contexts. But the development of the sector, you know, the move towards the individualisation of care, personalisation through SDS, doesn't encourage a collectivisation of employment conditions, and therefore again makes unionisation difficult. There's also, you know, suspicion of unions in the sector. It's undoubtable that some organisations suspect their motives. They feel as though that they will interfere with the mission of the organisation, that this would lead to damaging industrial action. This is not unlike perceptions that are common right across other sectors of the economy. There's nothing new here. You know, the only difference is that voluntary organisations are more engaged with mission rather than profit, and fear disruption to mission rather than profit. And this has led to, as we know from, you know, the recent developments, some hostile relations, reluctance to recognise, threats to de-recognise, some de-recognition, all possibly exacerbated by austerity. But nevertheless, we've also seen partnership at the workplace, innovative agreements to transfer resources to frontline pay, normal industrial relations, as opposed to partnerships, of which there's nothing wrong with, you know, and there are many forms of partnership as well. So we have I think, at workplace level, like a lot of sectors in the in the UK economy, a spectrum of different relationships and engagement with unions, traditional collective bargaining, forms of partnership, to forms of sort of recognition which could be described as a hollow shell. In other words, a union has a presence on paper, but in reality there's very little negotiation going on. Meanwhile, what's happened to pay? What's happened to pay and other terms and conditions? There's been a race to the bottom, we know, where prior to the Scottish living wage, you know, we saw many organisations compelled and forced, because of the whole kind of movement towards austerity, paying sums of money no bigger or very close to the national minimum wage. We've seen the erosion of pension entitlement, sickness, hours more fragmented, the ending of payment of travel time, the ending of payment of premiums on unsocial hours, issues around the work effort bargain, work intensification. And then we had we've had the Fair Work agenda, influenced by unions, and also the move towards a living wage. But on their own, these measures have not been enough to counter the race to the bottom. They've been progressive and well-intentioned. And as I said, at workplace level, we've seen different innovations. And even COVID has brought some kind of, I think, bright, signs of some kind of optimism or good relations between management and unions. You know, so we've seen unions in some workplaces actually help voluntary organisations or point voluntary organisations in the right direction in terms of securing government funding to keep them going during this crisis. At the same time, we've seen we've seen some conflict, perhaps at the workplace level again over issues around PPE, etc., and worker safety. So again, the workplace has been the focus of industrial relations. But what the report now argues is that yes, fair work should be a priority, and there should be a sector level body that encourages that. But they also ask for the creation of a national sector level collective bargaining of terms and conditions. Well, what does that mean? And what does it imply? Well, this means that if it goes forward, terms and conditions of employment will be negotiated at national level between representatives of employers in the voluntary sector and social care more widely, adult social care, and national unions. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. Now, I'm an industrial relations scholar. I have been for 30 years. I would support national bargaining. I think it brings advantages to both parties. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. Employers do not go into this type of arrangement if there's no advantage for them. And certainly the advantages are clear. For the unions, obviously, it brings a common rule and rate for the job. No matter where their members work within and across organisations, if national collective bargaining is in place, there will be a standard set of terms and conditions that they can guarantee their membership. And this gives unions, believe me, a significant sense of legitimacy and presence in a sector, over and above what happens at the workplace, because it promotes solidarity. The union has done this for us as a workforce, and that is, potentially significant organising benefits for the union. Now, that doesn't mean that your workforce turns against you as employers, because there is such a thing as dual commitment. In other words, people can be committed to their union and its values as well as to an organisation, whether it be a for-profit or voluntary organisation. So this notion of solidarity is crucial, and obviously it saves unions money by maximising stretched resources. So all smaller individual negotiations are taken out of the equation and moved to a higher level at sector level. Management has advantages as well from this. The more numerous advantages for management does not imply the balance of advantage is with management. There are just potentially more in number. The depth of advantage, I believe, belongs to trade unions, but nevertheless, there are advantages for organisations and the sector generally for moving to this model. It provides a union voice to increasing trade union pressure, a voice that's finding more resonance at the level of Scottish Government. It reduces time and resources on bargaining. It would mean that all the kind of locations of collective bargaining can be in some way kind of rationed, reduced, and moved to a national level. It institutionalizes conflict. In other words, where national bargaining occurs, there are procedures, appropriate kind of like rules, different areas of areas where organisations like ACAS can come in before any kind of strike action or other kind of industrial action can happen. And for employers, it stabilises and standardises wage costs in a sector that over the years I've seen accusations of undercutting, poaching on the other hand, that exacerbate recruitment and retention problems. The advantage of this cannot be underplayed. And for those organisations that don't necessarily want full engagement at the workplace with unions, a national agreement, if it's abided by, keeps union influence away from the workplace. So these are kind of standard, almost textbook advantages that each of the parties can gain from this. But the recommendation left me with a number of questions that I'm not going to answer. I'm just going to pose as issues as we move forward towards kind of a national collective bargaining model, if that's going to be one of the outcomes of this report. The first is, and you know, some of my reflections are definitely drawn from the research we've done on Scottish living wage, etc. The first is, what is going to be the bargaining unit? In other words, what category of employees are going to be covered by any particular collective agreement at national level between employer and union? One of the kind of outcomes of the project we did on the Scottish living wage was that, you know, in a sense, that was a national policy that covered national hourly rates of pay. But there were certain groups left out of it, like in care homes, domestics, catering, maintenance staff. In voluntary organisations, there's some occupations that slipped outside the definition of frontline care worker. Are these workers in some way going to be included in this kind of bargaining unit? How does such a bargaining unit or multiple bargaining units account for the different levels of skill and differentials between the different types of adult social care that are out there? Care homes, care at homes, as opposed to, you know, care for those with learning disabilities, etc., mental health problems. In other words, there's a lot of questions to be asked about the structure of this particular initiative, national bargaining, which are as yet unresolved and probably in early discussions. The other issue, I think, which is interesting, is what is to be negotiated. Obviously pay, but national collective bargaining generally means that the scope of agreements, in other words, the number of issues that are discussed between management and unions, is broader than at the workplace level. So, you know, you get issues such as skills and upskilling and training standards discussed. You know, you think about the public sector peer review bodies, their remit was originally quite narrow, but as they've become more embedded, the focus of discussion with unions has broadened. And this isn't a bad thing. You know, if you think a lot of fair work has a lot of moving parts in terms of skills development, if you have a joint approach, a collaborative approach that Annie discussed early on, then, you know, national collective bargaining can be a vehicle that can actually kind of promote that kind of joint regulation of issues beyond pay. How does national collective bargaining account for local circumstances and labour markets? In other words, one of the reasons why a lot of the private sector abandoned this sort of deal is that it couldn't cope with the nuances of local labour markets, problems with recruitment and retention. These are particularly, as we know, in your organisations, most pronounced in the countryside, rural, I can't say rural, the countryside, up north, on the islands and islands. How does national collective bargaining reflect the potential for demands for higher wage salaries in those areas because they are difficult to recruit areas? And the key question, I believe, I agree with Annie wholeheartedly and everybody to say you just can't pour money at the problem, right? You can't do that. But how does national collective bargaining achieve sustainable pay rises? Because the elephants will remain in the room. Public authorities strapped for cash will still be strapped for cash, especially as we move forward out of this current crisis where public expenditure has kind of hit the roof, and they'll need to claw some of that back. You know, we will all feel the effects of that, and public authorities, irrespective of whether or not it's a national collective bargaining agreement or not, the resource will determine the extent to which that national collective bargaining will deliver. And I think this is, you know, slightly sensitive issue. You know, is there sufficient expertise amongst the voluntary sector employer bodies to make this work. Now, if I sat in a room with Annie, and let's think Donald from Scottish Care, and we started negotiating, I'd imagine Annie and Donald would run rings around me single-handedly, never mind together. But the problem is they're going to be faced skilled negotiators from public sector and private sector unions who have been doing this for years, and collective bargaining is different. Annual collective bargaining is different. The experience of the voluntary sector of it is very varied. Some voluntary sector employers will say, yes, we recognise unions, but it's a matter of telling them what they're going to get paid every year. The unions will come in with a certain set of demands and they will not go away. So skills have to be developed, I think, at the level of the sector. It's going to be a continuous process. Gathering the intelligence about the needs of the sector is going to be vital. What's affordable in the sector? Who's going to do that legwork for the sector? What is the role of other external bodies to advise the sector, the employers in the sector, you as key people in organisations? Does ACAS have a role? Do health and local authority employers have a role in advising you in how best to go forward? Now, other specific, I think, lessons from the Scottish living wage, I think I'll just draw a couple from this point 8. I think any national collective bargaining approach has to be in tune with the nuances of the voluntary sector and context of the sector. If we learned anything from the introduction of the Scottish living wage, it was about the different kind of sub-markets that are involved there. It's about how paying the front line impacts on differentials with team leaders. It's about understanding where sleepovers sit in the expenses and also the pay of frontline workers. In other words, there are nuances and context that the implementation of the Scottish living wage missed, which a national approach to collective bargaining cannot miss. Otherwise, it will make the same mistakes as we found in the introduction of the Scottish living wage. Can you speak with a united voice as employers? Have you all got the same interests, or will this national system have to be fragmented in some way to take account of the different kind of services that you introduce and the different rates of pay and the different levels of skill within them? And this means that whatever body is created to move forward with this, that all the voices of employers have to be heard in the development of not only a system, but also on an annual basis with regard to what a pay offer should look like for the workforce in such a national system. And the unions have an interest in this as well, because the unions want this to work if it goes forward. And it can only work if both sides are adequately resourced and adequately prepared for the type of demands that a national approach to collective bargaining brings with it. Okay, so that's my thoughts on that whole agenda. And certainly I think it's not the easiest thing to move forward with, but I'm optimistic because I'm an old industrial relations scholar that it will go forward. I'm sure Annie would like to debate that with me as well as others. But I see it as it's not a panacea, not for the unions, not for the sector. It has challenges, but it also brings advantages. And what it's done is raise a lot of questions for me. I think the next part is about democratisation and the move, as Annie quite rightly pointed out, towards a suspension of competition and marketisation in the sector. And let's face it, it's been a long road, a long experiment in marketisation in the last 10 years, 10, 15, 20 years. And it starts from a very unbalanced relationship between yourselves and local authorities. Their power, the asymmetry of power between you both in terms of the whole sort of procurement and problems that you face as organisations in terms of sustainability has been based on the imbalance of resources, the regulatory authority that local authorities hold, and also the resource dependence that you've experienced in terms of, most of your resources have come from, local authorities, whether they be single local authorities or multiple local authorities. Now, there has been there's variations in relationships with purchases from the local authority sector. And, it can depend on your own sort of product market, how you diversify your funding, personal contacts, your own reputation, but it remains, and how it always has been, unbalanced in nature. And I would argue that as competition and, developments in competition, such as retendering, framework agreements have developed over the years, this imbalance of power has again intensified as the years have gone by, along with austerity, the cuts in public expenditure, the lack of guarantees of work in some framework agreements that are tied to SDSS, austerity conditions which have demanded more for less, increasingly restrictive eligibility criteria, and persistent rises of demand in the services that you offer. And on top of that, you've had new actors coming in, like the health and social care partnerships. And what this has meant, I think, is that even those that had some advantage in the market based on what they delivered, their diversification in funding, personal contacts, reputation, such has been, if you like, the intensity of market pressures, these advantages themselves have eroded. And unsurprisingly, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, the culmination, certainly for me and my colleagues, was this unraveling of local markets. Voluntary organisations basically saying, we just cannot sustain this any longer. We are now going to have to hand back the contract. Now, in this context, it's timely, I think, that somebody, and the Feeley report has done this, has said, hang on a sec, we need to think about something else besides competition, austerity. We need to bring collaboration, partnership, and there's a whole wealth of quotes from the report that emphasize this, which are on the slides. I won't necessarily go through them, but they talk about the move away from mistrust, radically redesigning commissioning and procurement around the common good and stewardship of public money. All this wrapped up in a national care service, and great words. And I think, like Annie, something that I wasn't expecting. You sort of fear the worst from some reviews, and the swiftness of the review did raise some kind of alarm bells. But nevertheless, we have this kind of notion of a national care service, the ending of competition, or certainly the suspension of competition, and moving to more collaborative work relations. But again, what are the lessons from the research that I'd like to draw from? And this is my last few final comments. The handing back of contracts, to me, as well as the implementation of the Scottish Living Wage, really meant to me and my colleagues that the market had become increasingly dysfunctional. But I believe reforms are quite difficult. The reforms are bold and ambitious. But our experience of dealing with local authorities, and this is not an attack on local authorities, this is about understanding their position as well. In a sense, there's a lot of questions about, I think if I move down to the fourth bullet point here, one of the things we've picked up over the years is on every project, it's a bit about these 32 different ways of doing things. In other words, local authorities defend and keep their power, whether it be in terms of the Scottish living wage, whether it be the implementation of SDS. There's always their way of doing things. They are key actors in the market. And what the report suggests to me is the way forward, is in some way to diminish that role, to hand more influence to the health and social care partnerships. Already I suspect there's some resistance against this, because for local authorities, local democracy counts, not the pay rates of voluntary sector providers. It's largely about handling resources at the local level and reflecting the views of their local kind of constituencies. So I think it's going to be a very difficult ask to tear any influence away from local authorities, or indeed it's going to take careful negotiation. And even when you bring in new actors into this national care service, like a revamped group of health and social care partnerships as voluntary providers, that to me, and again this links back to a project we did on handing back contracts, it's about that's about building new relationships and new partnerships. And these new agencies, irrespective of what their mission or vision is, they initially will be quite remote from your concerns and what your priorities are. So what any national care service is going to involve, which involves new actors, whatever they may be, in this case, health and social care partnerships, as a sector, you're going to have to start building the solid foundations of good relationships from the future. And that takes time, and that takes effort, and that takes proving things like, or continuing to prove things like your ability to deliver. But another problem with this kind of change, which we've again picked up from our work on SDS, and particularly the work we did with Andrew Eccles from our Arts and Social Science faculty, is that regulation, and we all know this is going to take regulation, that says actors in a marketplace have to change their behaviour because their roles and responsibilities change, doesn't always necessarily have the effects that you want it to have. The intention is there in the policy, but the implementation at the ground level, at the level of the bureaucracy, and even further down, the actors within a bureaucracy, is crucial. Because history shows us that organisations and actors within organisations can, to some degree, subvert the intentions of policy. Now, we've had things like SDS that talks about we're moving to outcomes and changes to where we deliver services. It's not just going to be based on an hourly rate of pay, an hourly rate of care. And then voluntary organisations in the last few years have gone to commissioners and procurement officers to talk about outcomes and changes in lifestyle, and be faced with the questions is, okay, how many hours of care does this actually involve? In other words, behaviours at the ground level need to change, culture needs to change, as well as regulation. And this is a profound and significant job for the social care sector to undertake. And what makes it difficult sometimes is, and there's an American academic called Lipsky, who points out that where there's limited resources, where there's ambiguity, where there's a threat of more work for people at this level, resistance and subversion of the intended aims is more likely to occur. So this tells you about, as we move forward with this agenda, the question of resources is will hang over us in perpetuity. There'll never be enough resources. but it's about clarity. What are the changes of roles that the National Care Service will demand that will, you know, change behaviours for the good? What level of extra responsibility is going to be placed on the workforce, both at public authority level as well as voluntary sector level? Because where there is an intensification of work, this is where you find resistance to change. And I think, again, I accept what Annie says, throwing money at this is not going to be the problem. But one of the key issues we found across projects like SDS, like the Scottish Living Wage, is that the best progressive policies can be undermined. The best intentions continue to be undermined by the undervaluation of care and the under-resourcing of care. And if this continues, all the structures in the world, I believe, and all the reforms in the world, I believe, will not alter the fact that the care sector has been going through a tough time, and any continuation of underfunding, your significant underfunding, will continue this. And a final couple of points. Commissioning, procurement, workforce reform, I believe, cannot be done in isolation. The report suggests it's not going to be, but it's a huge task that they are setting themselves. The danger is if they do it piecemeal. You know, so for example, what the introduction of the Scottish Living Wage taught us is that just dumping a progressive policy that's socially conscious into a marketised system just sets the wheels of that marketised system to subvert it and make life difficult for those intending to pay things like the Scottish Living Wage. So it has to be done in coordination. But another lesson we learned from certainly our investigations into SDS is there's a danger of doing too many big things together, because the biggest thing can push the smaller but equally important things off the edge. So there has to be coordination of this, careful coordination of this myriad of changes that we see coming over the horizon. And my final concern and question is the problem we face. I'm going to have a drink of water. The problem we face is austerity has hollowed out, not only in Scotland, but across the UK, not just the public purse, but the capacity of public organisations. You see this right across the experience of COVID. You know, we've seen errors, lack of capacity. And what this to me suggests is that we're going to have to build capacity for a national care service to be delivered. It cannot be done on existing resources. There has to be some recognition of the value of public organisations working in partnership with voluntary and private organisations that are adequately resourced for this to be delivered. Okay, I have some concluding comments. Steep learning curve in terms of national collective bargaining, but there are advantages. I think any regulatory change to procurement has to account for responsibilities, powers and resources of actors. And I think the whole thing does need to be coordinated. We can't do any change in a piecemeal fashion. And my last point is slightly gloomy, but when will austerity ever end? Because it needs to, in some way, to end for social care. Okay, thank you very much.
That's brilliant, Ian. Thank you very much indeed for that. I have had a couple of folk in the chat ask if we're okay to share your slides. I know we've got a copy of them. Ian, are you comfortable with us sharing those with everyone here?
I'll also share my slightly updated ones. I did do a bit of tweaking, but I'll send them on to Lynn now.
That would be great, Ian. Thanking you. Before I go on to Q&A, I would like to ask everyone to thank Annie and Ian in the not so time-honoured fashion. If you aren't familiar with Zoom, there is a reactions button on Zoom. If you click there, you should be able to give them thumbs up, claps, big smiley faces, whatever you feel is appropriate after that input from Annie and from Annie and from Ian. And you're getting a clap from you guys, and hopefully everybody else will join in. So going on to some questions and answers, and I have some questions from the chat, and some of those are specifically for individual, for one of you or the other, and some are both. So I'm just going to take them in the order that I saw them, and the first couple were from someone whose name isn't in the chat. Their username is listed as Fire Tablet, so I don't know who you are, Fire Tablet, but I'm going to ask your questions. I'm going to come to Annie first, if you don't mind, Annie. Why, if council staff or NHS staff are getting better terms and conditions, would a national care service of single employment terms and conditions be a detriment? I'm not necessarily saying that you are saying that, but
I'm not saying it will be a detriment. I'm not saying it'd be a detriment at all.
No.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things about it, really. One is obviously we're talking about a levelling up here, because I can't see the public sector agreeing to anything less than they've got at the moment. So given that they are less than a third of the social care workforce, we're talking about a levelling up, and that's where Ian's point about the financing becomes very, very pertinent, because we are talking about a lot of money here. I mean, one thing I will take issue with Ian about is this idea that there was a race to the bottom for pay in social care. No, there wasn't. The third sector was being dragged to the bottom. And so, you know, nobody in this sector was racing anywhere.
I agree completely, Annie. Sorry, yeah. It's an unfortunate turn of phrase, but you're right, dragged to the bottom. I've used that one myself, so we're not in disagreement. It's a better.
Good. We were resisting that a long time ago. So a couple of thoughts about kind of national standards for pay terms and conditions. Generally speaking, I'm all for it, because we've argued for parity with our public sector colleagues, you know, for ever since I was in this game, which is quite a long time now. But what I think we need to be very, very careful about is, I mean, anyone here who's done a job evaluation exercise will know that these things become very, very rigid. And so if what we're trying to do with social care is to let 1,000 flowers bloom, that people can direct their own support and they can design their own support, they can have different models, they can have different approaches. What we do not then want is a kind of standard a menu of work roles, and we cannot ever have anything else. Because, you know, we already know with the regulatory system that by defining things in regulations, we pretty much nailed down any sense of doing anything differently or being innovative in any way at all. So really, really need to avoid that. So that would be my answer to that one, Ian. If I might peg on a couple of comments in response to what Ian was talking about with national collective bargaining. I'm fascinated by this. I'm really fascinated by this, particularly when it comes to the private sector, because, you know, in the third sector, union membership is quite low. In the private sector, it's non-existent. So what I'm really interested in is if we have unions around the table now, who are they representing? In whose interests are they speaking, and to whom are they accountable? Right, because unions have to be accountable the same as everybody else. So if you just have a kind of free-floating union presence in some kind of pay negotiation, and there's absolutely no constituency of membership for them to go back and discuss this with, and they have no mandate from the workforce to be there in the first place, then I think that's a real problem. That's a real problem, because that's the easiest job in the world, to go and shout the odds about what you want when you're not accountable to anybody for it. And the other thing, I totally take the point about Ian's point about the skill set that will be required on behalf of employers. But unions won't be negotiating with employers here. They'll be negotiating with the government because employers, it is not in the gift of employers to pay any particular rate of pay beyond that which they get funded for through government and presumably through the National Care Service. So it's a very, very different kind of scenario from just, you know, the old fashioned, here's an employer, here's a union, let's hammer it out over a table with beer and sandwiches. You know, that's not how this is going to work. And my worry, and I speak with my hand up as a union member, long in the tooth as a union member, but unions are accountable to their membership. If they do not have a membership, then what are they doing around the table and on whose behalf? That would be my question. Thank you.
I mean, just a couple of responses there, Andy. I think you're right about the issue around flexibility and the rigidness, and that's an issue that most national systems have wrestled with, and one of the reasons why employers moved away from it, because there was inadequate flexibility in national terms and conditions. So any new approach will have to account for that, as do existing forms of national collective bargaining. So I think I take that on board. The issue of representation, again, I do take this on board, and I think that's the problems that, or certainly the problem that the unions will have. Who are you representing exactly? But in the past, certainly in a system where it's not entirely unknown to the voluntary sector, because in a system where the voluntary sector took on terms and conditions from the public sector, it's not necessarily about, if you like, the membership. It's about the benefits of the regulatory reach of a union that talks to employers as well as government about what is most appropriate for the sector. So any union bargaining unit, whether it's at a workplace level, will have non-union members. But the reality is that everybody in the bargaining unit will benefit from increased pay. So it's up to the unions to first of all, as you rightly point out, increase membership in the sector, both private and voluntary, but also be in tune with what the sector can actually pay. Yeah, so there's kind of a duality going on there. So yeah, I mean, I've not got an answer to that, but it's touched on the perennial problem that unions have in the sector, that they are poorly represented. However, what a national collective bargaining agreement may do is act as a spur to increase union membership, because all studies of union organisation and union membership show that the crucial thing for boosting membership is recognition. And if they're given some recognition, people join. So that it's almost like a chicken and egg situation there.
Cheers.
You see, I've got no answer to your questions in some respects, but it's mainly, isn't this, you're right, isn't this fascinates me as well, because I'm an industrial relations scholar.
Cheers, Ian, thanking you. Next question I have here is from Alex Stober. He's specifically asked Annie, but if there's examples you want to come in on, Ian, that would be great. How can individuals and carers and families work with organisations to design citizen-centred services? And should we start with redesigning SDS as an early exemplar?
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Alex. Well, I don't think we need to redesign SDS. I think we need to implement it. It's the report was very clear that it hasn't been implemented properly. So rather than redesign it, it's still there. There is nothing wrong with self-directed support. There's nothing wrong with the legislation. There's nothing wrong with the guidance. There's nothing wrong with the principles. We just need to get on and do it. So how you involve individuals in all of this, I think, is a really interesting question. And I think Lynn has also kind of put that in the chat as well. Where does the involvement come in for people who rely on services and for their families? So I see this as being at kind of 3 levels, if you like. So at the individual level of what support do you want, then that, if we implement SDS properly, then that's sorted, because it's very, very clear what needs to happen there. It's just not happening. At the more kind of strategic level locally, then you have a proposal in the review for a kind of revamped integrated joint board. The proposal is that the existing integrated joint board membership remains, but the strategic commissioning membership also joins it. So then you've got, potentially you've got a cast of thousands. So it's quite an unwieldy meeting. But, who says any of this is going to be easy, right? You don't build an inclusive system by starting from the point of view that you have to exclude people because it's difficult. You know, yes, it is difficult and it is going to be difficult, but we're just going to have to roll up our sleeves and find a way of doing it. And the really interesting thing about the proposals around IJBs is that finally, everybody will be on the same footing. So you don't just get the people there from the public bodies who have a vote. Everybody has a vote, right? So my view of health and social care integration and the architecture that we've been working with up till now, when you think the whole point of integration was to bang social work and NHS heads together, if we're being honest, right? That was the point, because they could not agree between themselves about what to do. So they were put into a room together to sort it out. But what we did in that was we replicated exactly the same situation by giving equal number of votes to the NHS and to the local council. So all we did was just kind of build the same system again within the same body. This time, you're going to have the carers reps, you're going to have the community reps, you're going to have the third sector reps, you're going to have the user reps, you're going to have the professionals, you're going to have everybody, the providers on the lot. Everybody will have a vote. And probably the number of people who are not public bodies in the room will outnumber the number of people from public bodies in the room. Now, won't that be interesting? Because the money men at that point are going to have to make a pitch to a much wider community of interest to approve their decisions about what they do with the money. So that's actually quite exciting for me. And then when you look at the national level, you have got a national care service, you've got a minister, you've got a chief executive, and you've got a board of the National Care Service, which also includes people who use services and carers. So you've got that kind of built in at every level. Now, there's going to be challenges there around who exactly is going to have to take on the responsibility of being, you know, the user and carer reps. And we've been around the houses with that many times, but we have found solutions to that. So that's what's so kind of exciting about this, is that everybody gets, it's a massive collaborative affair. You kind of bust through the hierarchy, at least on paper. The trick is how you're going to make it work. And there was an interesting bit in the chat earlier on about, like, quite up the list, where somebody brought up implementation and how we're going to take that forward. And I think that is, yeah, that's a real challenge, because the same people who are charged with implementing this new way of working are the people who have been taking forward the old way of working. You know, we're not going to get some mass exodus of staff and personnel here and their replacement by a whole lot of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people who want to do things differently, right? So if this is going to work, we all have to believe it's worth doing, or it won't happen, which is what Ian was saying, I think, about the kind of culture change here. Because what we find is that people in the system, they act in the interests of their organization and not in the interests of the objective that we are all trying to achieve. And we're seeing that now. You know, we're seeing that now with certain interest groups coming forward, picking holes in the review because they don't like what it means for their own interests, right? So we all have to kind of teach ourselves a new way of working, which is to forget all of that. You know, community planning was supposed to do this. All these collaborative ways of working were supposed to do this, and we haven't actually managed to get past the point where you sit around the table and you represent the interests of your employer. Right? That is what has to change completely. We are supposed to be there to serve a purpose, which is the interests of the people who rely on social care and their families. And that is it. And if it means that we all have to give up a bit of power and we have to put our own interests secondary to that, then so be it. That's what we have to do. And so I think the way that the National Care Service is structured is you're going to have a much more linear set of accountabilities in relation to that. And it will become very obvious when people are not actually acting in the interest of the people who use social care, they're acting in their own interests. I think it'd be much easier to winkle that out once we have this kind of more linear set of accountabilities. Thanks, Ian.
Cheers, Annie. Ian, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, again, yeah, that last point you were making, Annie, I think touches on certainly some of the concerns we had about SDS in terms of changes in behaviour in different organisations. There are interests, and the other issue, I think, as I was trying to say, is the different moving parts where, you know, certainly we found evidence that SDS being introduced alongside integration pushed SDS into the margins, in many respects, or it wasn't supposed to. They were all supposed to be integrated, and that's the difficulty when you've got quite big measures going on at the same time. And this, as I said, this whole review suggests many moving parts all trying to go towards the same end, but with competing interests within them. So trying to pull that all together is the key task, and making sure the crucial elements like SDS don't fall off the end, or indeed Fair Work doesn't fall off the end. Because I agree, yes, the ultimate end is about the service user, but you can't get there without ensuring that the workforce is adequately rewarded and developed and skilled. So these things all have to go together, and that's the tough ask.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if I may, and just as another point to make, is that for me, the recommendations of this review are a package. You do them all. What our first kind of reaction to it was to look at it and think, great, but please do not start cherry picking out the bits you like and leave the bits you don't like. Because the whole point is that the system isn't working, so you need a system-wide response. You don't just suddenly say, oh well, if we pick out the Fair Work bits, that will sort it. Or if we ignore the bits that are challenging for local government, well, we'll leave it as it is and we'll do the rest. No, this is a whole package response, right? So, and it's being driven by a minister, it's going to be driven by a chief exec, and it's going to be driven by a board. Because if you just cherry pick the bits that you like and that everybody agrees on, then you're not going to get the result that the whole thing is designed to bring about. Right. It was interesting that Derek Feeley quoted something from my erstwhile colleague Dee Fraser, who's now running IRIS, which is a great one for systems change enthusiasts. And it says every system is perfectly designed to bring about the result that it does. So if we don't like the result that we're getting at the moment, which we don't, that's why there was an urgent need for reform, then it's the system that has to change. It's not you over there, you have to change. I'm not going to change. No, thank you, I'm fine. It's a package. So I think we do it all or we don't bother. Really, is that I think the choice is that stark. And personally, I want to do it all. And I want to do it all and some, because there are some wee bits missing. I mean, there was quite a good bit of chat in the sidebar there earlier on about my reflection that digital didn't play a big enough part in this, and there was a lot that people contributed to the discussion there, all of which I would absolutely agree with. So let's do Feeley and then some. Let's not do Feeley minus, let's do Feeley plus.
Cheers, Annie, thanking you. Going to come to yourself first, Ian, on this time, just to switch it about a little bit, and I'm going to combine two questions, which I think are quite connected. Fiona Purchase has asked: is a national approach to an opportunity to standardise best practice, or are there concerns that standardising practice across authorities might result in a levelling down in some areas? And connected to that, Rachel Mason has asked: should we be going national or looking more to community? If the old saying is it takes a village to bring up a child, is that not the same principle that any social care system should be built upon? Rather than a self-made system with competitive centering, what would be the opportunities for communities to step back and invest in services that might include a local marketplace and local employment that communities themselves self-direct and quality check to make sure they're achieving local outcomes? There's an awful lot more to Rachel's question people can read in the room, but I've tried to just capture enough that it's not overwhelming. Ian, thoughts?
If I've got the first question right, will a national approach lead to a levelling down? If you're talking about terms and conditions, I think if we move towards a national approach and some kind of comparability, as Annie said, with public sector, you cannot see public sector unions or workers accepting any kind of downturn in their terms and conditions. So if I'm reading the question right, it's a levelling up. That's the intention. As we said, we've witnessed a dragging to the bottom, Annie, and you know, I think we've gone as far with that as we can possibly go. We went as far as that as we could possibly go a few years ago. And any further diminishment I don't think will be acceptable. If you think you've got recruitment and retention problems now, they'll only intensify if that goes on. The labour market will tell you something very different, as well as the unions, that the way is up. The only way has to be up, I think, in terms of worker skills, terms and conditions, and how they feel about themselves, how they feel valued. You know, that's a key thing. Workers feel undervalued, so there has to be a levelling up. And I think that's been recognised by Scottish Government through the things like Scottish Living Wage, but it's not been enough. There needs to be, as we said, a systemic change. The second question about local communities, I mean, that's an interesting one. We touched on this when we did a report, one of our reports for SDS, and you know, the idea of local communities kind of setting up their own services and regulating them in terms of you know, employment, but also the delivery of services. On the surface seems to fly in the face a little bit of the whole agenda of a national care service, but again, I'd be interested to hear Annie and other people's reflections on this. A national care service, yes, but one I think that still is in tune with local needs. That's a difficult equation to kind of balance, I think. That local should still matter, but within a framework of national standards. In terms of workforce question, or the workforce question that's inherent in that, the problem is what type of employment. You know, the evidence we suggested from early kind of SDS experiments was that it was becoming more and more casualised. Forms of, you know, bogus self-employment or forms of self-employment were emerging. And we're seeing enough of that down south. You know, workers becoming more vulnerable rather than more protected. So I think, yes, with safeguards for workers. In other words, a minimum under which standards cannot fall. I think that's the important thing there. I hope that answers your question, or at least starts a discussion around it.
Cheers, Ian. And I think that's fair. I suppose one of the other questions before I bring Annie in for me is, what do we mean by local? Because I think when Scottish Government talk about local, they still to me mean Glasgow wide. And I think very often from a third sector perspective, that's not necessarily what we mean by local. We usually mean much smaller.
Yeah, my sense is much smaller, I would agree. Yeah.
Annie.
Okay, well, the chills run up my spine when I hear standardized practice, I'm afraid, because that practice that is up to standard, fine, but not standardized practice, because the implication there is, you know, standard issue, you get what you're given, you know, and that is absolutely everything that we're trying to get away from here. So there's some really interesting bits in the report about this, and it's the parts that focus on quality improvement and the role of the Care Inspectorate. Because as you know, the Care Inspectorate was created as a regulator. A regulator is not the same as an improvement body, and the Care Inspectorate has been sort of trying to take itself on a journey from regulator to improvement body for 20 years, really, and it's still not there. But finally, the penny has dropped in this report, I think, that you cannot inspect for quality. You just can't. If you want quality improvement, then you do something else. I mean, inspection and regulation is all very important in terms of public assurance and rooting out, the cowboys and all the rest of it. But if you really want to improve practice and get it up to standard, then you need a different approach. And this is one of the areas where I think there are gaps to be filled here, because there's quite a lot of promotion in the report of improvement science and improvement methodology as it is applied in the NHS. So, for example, the National Patient Safety Programme is mentioned. Now, that's quite a long way from social care. Patient Safety Programme, the methodology, a lot of it is about, clinical outcomes, which, let's face it, are much more easily measured. People either get better or they don't. Operations either work or they don't. I'm simplifying for effect here, obviously, but the social care is not a clinical area, and so techniques which work in clinical areas might not work in social care. So I'm really kind of thoughtful about that. And how practice then will be improved by the application of these technologies, because it's not improved by inspection, it's not improved by regulation. It's improved more than anything else by a feedback loop from the people who use the service. And that is why the third sector tends to get the kind of higher gradings from the care inspectorate around quality of care and support, because they're better at that. You know, there's a quality assurance system which relies on feedback from the people who use the service to improve it. So that kind of thing, I think, is also very, very potentially very exciting in there. As far as the kind of local versus national, that has beset social care as an issue, you know, and not just social care, any kind of public service, actually, from time immemorial. But I'm kind of a bit thoughtful here about the feedback that went into the review from disabled people and people who use social care, because the local variation was something that they really, really didn't like. You know, the postcode lottery, that you can get something in Dumfries, but you can't get it somewhere else. So if there's going to be a kind of standardization, it might be in the offer. You know, we will have a range of support that will meet your needs wherever you are. But what that will look like and who will be providing that, that's when we drill down into the SDS part, which is, well, you're going to help us design that with you. You know, and we'll try to facilitate a range of providers. It might not be a market by then. I mean, it'll be a market in the sense that people will be able to choose from it, rather than commissioners will be able to set the price for it, which is how the market works at the moment. And again, I think that's where we need to fill in the gaps here about exactly how this setting of national thresholds, bars, standards will then interplay with people actually doing things that are very responsive to their own communities. And to their own, and to individuals at a local level, and that is not, at the moment, that's not super clear in the report. But our view of that is, well, let's make it clear then, us, you know, because if we don't do it, somebody else come and do it for us. And this is where I come back to us needing to approach this collaboratively. This is interesting enough and exciting enough for us all to get around the table and say, right, how can we make this work then? Rather than do what we normally do and sitting back and say, well, I don't like that. I don't like that, you know, kind of picking holes in things. And actually, you know, hands up, my entire job forever has been picking holes in things. And I'm not going to do it this time. I'm not going to do it this time.
Excellent. Cheers. Annie, thank you.
Sorry, just to comment there. I mean, it's interesting. I was involved in some feedback to the equivalent review, Royal Commission, you know, in the state of Victoria in Australia, and they were making exactly the same point, Annie, about the application of clinical health methodologies into social care. There's a big fear in Australia with regard to that particular direction of travel, and you know, the problem with integrating is that elements of health take over and bring inappropriate approaches to review, you know, etc. So yeah, it's just a reflection rather than a question. It is a debate that goes beyond Scotland. It's something that's happening in other countries.
Cheers, Ian. I'm going to tie a question in, Annie. It's a question for you. I'm going to jump a few because I think it connects really nicely. Annie, when you spoke about in your earlier, you talked about the new structures and the representation of people who use services and the representation of communities. We have a question here which is about asking what you think the solution might be to that representation, to that. I'm conscious, Annie, you might feel that's not a question for you, but I'm sure despite that you'll have some thoughts.
I've always got some thoughts.
From Isla McIntyre, question.
I've always got some thoughts, but you're absolutely right. You know, if we're going to find the best way to represent people who rely on services and their families, you know, we go and ask them, how would you like to be represented? You know, how can we figure this out? I mean, there's a couple of things that are already on the go. I mean, I mentioned the adult social care reform programme that was kind of pre-existing the Feeley review that was being led within the Scottish Government. And as part of that, Inclusion Scotland, our colleagues at Inclusion Scotland had worked to develop what they called the people-led policy panel. So this was a group of people who use social care from a variety of different experiences, and they came together, and that was supported, that was facilitated, and it's still extant. You know, they haven't gone away, those people. That is still a mechanism that is there. So, you know, if you want a way of including people right from the get-go in the board of the National Care Service, there it is. I mean, it's already there, and that was built up and facilitated and developed by disabled people's organisations, so that, you know, we're not starting from scratch here. We're not starting from scratch here. And you've also got at local level, as you know, I mean, you've got GDA in Glasgow, you've got LCIL in Lothian, you've got a whole bunch of disabled people's organisations and user groups. And we should and we must go and ask those groups how they want to be involved in this and how they can best play in, because I think the worst thing that we can do in the spirit of the Feeley report is to, you know, have a lot of senior executives sitting in a room making those decisions by themselves and then telling everybody how it's going to be, because that's where we've gone wrong from the start. In all of this. Now, you know, I could have many more thoughts, Ian, about how providers ought to be involved in all of this, but nobody wants to hear that today. Thank you.
And in the spirit of fairness, Ian, I have a question that was just targeted directly at yourself from Lynn Jordan. I will give you the opportunity to come in on that question as well, if you like, but specifically in terms of the austerity agenda, Ian. Lynn asks, do you think there are potential savings that there might be in the welfare bill if there was increased pay for the workforce in social care? I would go further. I would go, would there be a reduction in the welfare bill if we actually had social care that enabled people to participate fairly in society, I suspect, but that's my question rather than Lynn's. Stick to Lynn's question.
I think in a sense, yeah, they'll always have to look for savings elsewhere. Where that falls, that's kind of up to Scottish government, I think. And you know, the welfare bill is always sort of vulnerable. What you sort of fear in terms of additional pay is that there's the cost of it somehow gets passed down to providers as well. In other words, that whatever filters through to pay for that increase in pay, like with the Scottish living wage, providers are asked to find savings to cover that. In other words, the money isn't enough. And what happens is providers then have to search around for further efficiencies. And this only further hollows them out, I think, in terms of the reserves, just the types of frontline services that they're delivering. So I think, okay, yeah, the other parts of the public expenditure bill will probably suffer if you know, you spend more on another service. But within that service itself, like social care, you've still got that tradition whereby any increase in pay seems to always have to be paid for to a certain extent by the providers themselves through what they call efficiencies. And we all know what they've been in the past. They've been cuts to different types of services, or you know, finding efficiencies about, you know, not replacing certain staff and then intensifying the work of those remaining, or cutting back office or management costs, etc. The list can go on and on. So that's one of the fears I would have in any, and that's been going on for as long as I've been studying social care.
Thank you. I'm gonna wrap us up there. I will give, if Annie has any last thoughts that she wants to contribute off the back of that, she's very welcome. But other than that, I'm going to wrap us up and take a break, because people have been listening for nearly 2 hours, and I think it's healthy that we take a point and go grab 10 minutes and a cup of coffee. Annie, is there anything you want to say before we do that?
No, I'm happy to leave it there, Ian. Thanks very much. But also, I hope somebody's saving the chat here because there's some really good stuff in here. So thank you, everybody.
Lynn has it. Yeah, thank you, Annie, and thank you again and again. Can I ask people in the modern fashion to thank both Ian and Annie for what have both been some really excellent inputs this afternoon to kickstart this today. So if you can give the time honoured and thanking you. We will take a break at this point. Annie, what have you done to your screen? What's that?
Just showing off now, Annie.
She is. Well, says the man that's coming to us from space, but we'll thanking you. So we will take a break, and can I suggest that we're back for 3:25 to continue the second half? That would be great. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, folks, that's just after 25 past, so hopefully everybody managed to get a cuppa. And thank you for rejoining us. Next on our agenda, we have another video to show. This one is from two people who are supported by Shared Lives called Abby and Heather. So again, thank you to Shared Lives for helping us reach people and hear directly from Abby and Heather and creating this video for us. Can you tell I'm talking while I work out how to do technology? So hopefully, again, people can see that, and that should be it starting.
Hi, I'm Leslie from Shared Lives Plus. Shared Lives is a model of social care where a person who needs care and support is matched with a trained, approved Shared Lives carer. They can visit the Shared Lives carer for day support or short breaks, or they can live with the Shared Lives carer as part of their family. We are going to hear from two people who live in Shared Lives about what matters to them.
Abby, and I live in Dunbar, East Lothian, and I live with my Shared Life carer Louise and Andrew and my dog Derek.
Hi, my name is Heather. I stay in Kilmarnock with my Shared Lives carer Andrea, Spencer, Leila, Mitchell and Kirsty. Kirsty is also a part of Shared Lives. I've been staying with my family for nearly 4 years.
I know what I'm getting when I wake up. I'm getting loads of support. I'm loved. I'm not worried about where I'm going to stay or who I'm going to stay with or what is going to happen to me or anything like that. I know I'm safe. I'm in a safe environment and I'm loved. So that's great.
What's good is that I know that I'm safe. I've got a home. I have a family. I know that I have a safety net, and Andrea is always there when I need her, and I've not always had that in the past. I've been in care since I was 7, and I've been to like 7 different primary schools. The amount of placements that I've been like passed and parcelled, I can't count. So to have that stable family home is such a difference. It was a huge adjustment to my life, to get used to that, to be felt loved, to know that I could have a shoulder to cry on, but also to have moments in life that I'm just crying with laughter as well, and to go on holidays as well with my family as well is just amazing, really. And it's really brought me out my shell as well, because funny enough, I used to be really quiet and not really speak to anyone and not be able to trust anyone. But now I know that a problem shared is a problem solved, which I used to never think before. And that is through being in a family and having that support, really.
I volunteer at Oxfam in Haddington, which is a shop, it's a charity shop, and I also volunteer in the local community with I used to work in the garden, but I also volunteer at the day centre as well. So and play games with children with special needs.
So I'm part of the New Beginnings group, which is part of Cornerstone, and me and the group decided to set up a cafe and run it by ourselves, but obviously we needed a bit of support to do that. So we eventually, with all our hard work, managed to open a cafe, which is called the New Beginnings Cafe. And I bake all the cakes in there, so I cannot say that I will get anyone fat, but but I tend to do so. But I absolutely love it. We work as a team every single day. I work all week, so I start on the Monday and I finish on the Friday. During the weekend, I love spending time with my family and walking my 2 dogs as well. So that's my week.
Matters to me is to be respected as a whole. As a person, and just be treated like everybody else, and like to do everything that anyone else does, the same jobs, the same like social, like going out with my friends and going to Edinburgh, going clubbing, and just being part of the family. So that's what's really important to me.
I would like to see a change of getting shared lives out there, because obviously at 16, from talking about personal experience, I was really scared about going into my own house. As much as I was rearing for it to get that independence and to be out of the care system, it was actually a lot scarier than what I thought it would ever be. So for someone to tell me I was going to be in my own house, having to pay my own bills, to find a job, to do everything by myself without any support at all, it was really scary. So I'd like to see a change of being able to say to foster carers that are supporting a 16 to 18-year-old that they don't have to do it by themselves. There is shared lives out there, and also to learn social workers as well, if they're working with someone they know that might need that extra support, that is not ready to move into their own house by themselves, that there is shared lives out there as well, just to basically get shared lives out there. Because the more people that know about it, the more people can get supported, really.
Obviously, I was 17 when I moved here, so I'd like to, so more people know about it, so they can, you know, that they've got that option, rather than staying in somewhere that's not really safe for them, or that's really bad for them, like what was bad for me. So I'd like to see more, like, so people can get out of that situation.
Thank you again to Shared Lives for helping us bring that video today. I think that's something really powerful about that video, in terms of people talking about what they do and what's important to them, and that conversation isn't, just connected it back to earlier, that conversation isn't about the number of hours they get or the specific services that they get, but actually just that feeling of being supported to do what matters to them, which I really like. So again, thank you to Shared Lives for that. To finish off today, the last session we have is my colleague Sheena, who will be talking in conversation with Kirsty Orr from Glasgow City Health and Social Care Partnership. So Kirsty and Sheena, if you both want to make sure your videos are on and your microphones are on, I won't say any more than that, because I will leave it over to Sheena to introduce Kirsty.
Thank you, Ian, and what a great session we've had. I'm equally excited and overwhelmed, I think, at the same time with the conversation we're having. And yeah, to reflect on what's on the review and the conversation that we've had is yeah, quite a task. Can you hear me okay? Can you give me, yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, so for me, the review, there's some core themes emerging, and they've been highlighted in the conversation today about a valued workforce, a person-centred approach. Within the review, I think really strongly the need for meaningful engagement with the people who use services. And I like the phrase that came through a lot, nothing about me without me. And I think that's really important, that we're not doing two people, we're collaborating, we're having conversations, and that people that use services are absolutely at the centre, leading what happens next, which I think is really exciting. Also, not looking at deficits, but looking at assets, looking at the strengths of people and what their potential is to contribute, and that the system enables, it doesn't restrict, and we hear about that in the review from the person experiencing services, but also for the workforce. They can get tangled up in the system, and actually it can stop them doing the right thing at the right time. So I think all really positive, having a human rights-based approach. I think all of that absolutely makes sense. It's sensible, it's positive, and it's based on good practice, which I don't think many of us would argue with. It's as it should be. But for me, there's something about this that it sounds like it's an aspiration rather than the reality for people. And I think that's quite concerning, you know, at this stage in my career within health and social care, and for many people, I think. And I loved what Annie was saying, you know, it's time to, yeah, it's challenging, it's difficult, it's time to roll up our sleeves and get on with it and make it happen. And that's really what motivates me to be here. How are we going to do this? So I'm not going to dwell on why it's taken so long and why things haven't happened, but think about how we do this. And in particular, my role is working with the Health and Social Care Partnership. I'm employed by Glasgow Council for the Voluntary Sector. As Ian said, I'm part of GCVS, and my background is very much within the voluntary sector for over 20 years. So I've beamed myself into this new world, working with the Health and Social Care Partnership and on a programme of work that's building on a lot of work that's been done in Glasgow City. And I felt very much when we were, Lynn and others, planning today, felt like the programme of work that I'm employed in absolutely is aligned with a lot of the recommendations that are in the review. And it felt like this is a good news story, actually, because a lot of work is going on in Glasgow. A lot of things have been mentioned today about building good relationships, about culture change, about acknowledging where we are and what we need to do. We're having those conversations in Glasgow, and I think that is really positive. I feel like we're, you know, not that we're ahead of the game, but we're preparing ourselves for what's to come, which is really positive. And delighted to have colleagues within the partnership here today, and as Ian said, Kirsty, who's the programme lead for the programme of work, which is called Maximising Independence. Kirsty's going to join me for a conversation shortly. I say maximising independence, I want to acknowledge that that's what we presently call the programme of work, because we are just going through near the end of our research process, and I know there's much discussion about the name of the programme and what it means to different people. So we may well be talking about a different programme, but the name isn't really my top priority. It's the work that we're doing. And I know language is really important, and I say that almost every day, but I think the intention, the motivation, the vision of the work is what's really important. And this programme is a Health and Social Care Partnership Transformation Programme. It's about people's experience of health and social care. It's about a preventative approach, supporting people to live their best life that they can with minimal restriction, but with the support that they need, what they want and when they need it. And that's really important. And we see some of those themes coming out in the review about people really having to fight to get what they need, or they might get it in one part of the country or not another. So those themes are very much part of maximising independence. Also, why my role, obviously I think my role is important, is about how the third sector and the Health and Social Care Partnership work together, that we can improve that relationship, that the third sector is involved at the earliest stage. So we're around the table having conversations before things are designed, before they're at the delivery, before it's, oh gosh, we forgot about that, or we can't do this. It's about that early stage and really valuing the contribution that the third sector brings. It's also about how we, as has been mentioned, the representation of people who use services, carers, loved ones, how those people are engaged in this. And we know the third sector can really do a lot with that to support that engagement. So hearing the voices of people that we haven't heard from before is really important within this programme. So I'm going to stop yabbering and invite Kirsty to join me. Kirsty, I've learned lots about Kirsty actually in preparation for today. I've been working with Kirsty for almost a year, but not actually met. So I look forward to meeting in the non-virtual world in the future. But Kirsty comes from a nursing background. She's a qualified nurse and has specialised in cardiology, but then has done her masters and moved into patient pathways, operational management, looking at how emergency services are configured, and most recently leading on programmes of change, older people within mental health and the redesign of health and social care out of hours. So a whole lot to bring. When I read that, I thought, gosh, what have I been doing with myself? But anyway, Kirsty has joined Maximising Independence programme last year and leads the programme within the Health and Social Care Partnership. So thank you, Kirsty, for joining me for a conversation.
Pleasure, Sheila, pleasure.
We've been having a few conversations about brave conversations, and it feels like this is one of them now.
It does, in the spotlight.
Yeah, in the spotlight, and really delighted you're joining me for this. We thought it would be useful, I guess. I've given a brief picture of Maximising Independence and what it's about, but do you want to add to that in terms of the programme for those that might not know about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it would just be helpful just to give a bit more of a context, if that seemed a good place to start. And then we could talk a wee bit about the structure of the programme around our co-design approach and how we're working together to be different, so that we deliver something quite different and it's not more of the same. So probably just as a starting point, I think we're all really well versed in relation to some of the dark clouds that hang over Glasgow City in relation to some of our population demographics. You know, if you just pick, there's lots to pick from, but I suppose just thinking about it in terms of deprivation, Glasgow City contains 4 in 10 of Scotland's 15% of most deprived areas. So really, 2/5 of Glasgow's population live in these areas, and that's more of 250,000 people. So that gives some context of the situation or the circumstances that we're working in. We also understand that there's some increasing complex needs of the people that live in Glasgow, with 8,000 people are estimated to be living with dementia. And Glasgow also has an over 13,000 population of problem drug users, which equates about 3.2% of the adult population, which is almost double the national average. So some real complexity that we're all responding to. But within that as well, that we know that actually wellbeing and perceptions of wellbeing are not all that they should or could be within the city. And around 12% of Glasgow's 16 and over population, so that's almost 62,000, have said that they live in bad or very bad health. And that is, you know, when you compare that to the national picture, that would equate to about 8%. I think there's something as well, you know, where we are living through some unprecedented times with the COVID pandemic, which has impacted on us all in all aspects of our life. But there's some broader structural context as well that's important to think about people that will be in work longer. And I think Ian was reflecting on some of these challenges in his presentation earlier. And family units are different.
Yeah.
So for me, that kind of really, so essentially life is different. And I think that really highlights the need for us to do something quite different and be something quite different. I think also just reflecting on the context is, and knowing the system, and when I talk about the system, you know that Sheena, I always make the point of meaning the whole system, and I mean that in terms of acute systems, HSCP, and also third and independent sectors as well. So when I'm mentioning the system, that's who I'm making reference to. I'm not just talking about statutory services, but we know, and obviously we've heard of the everyone is under considerable pressure, and we know that the situation needs to change. So I think really for me, maximising independence as our current working title, as you touched on, Sheila, is really about finding the Glasgow City way to transform health and social care, and that really is what it is about. But probably adding on to that, it's about looking at ways that we need to find out ways that matter to people that also deliver the services. We also need to find out what matters to people who access them or who will access them in the future as well. We think also back to some of the population data that we know, to help build an agile, sustainable and compassionate model of care for the city. And I think maximising independence, so there's lots of strategies and reviews and papers, and obviously we've been talking about the adult review as well, but I think for me, maximising independence seeks to navigate the spaces within that complex landscape and address some of the gaps so that we can understand and really start to employ the best use of our city's resources by working together across that system that I talked about a minute ago, and starting to think about that culture of empowerment and asset-based practice that we need to develop. So I think that was probably a kind of position of maximising independence. And what I thought I would just do is just cover some of the work streams, unless you wanted to have a chat on anything I've said so far. You okay?
No, I think that's grand, thank you.
That's okay. Sheena, I should just say at this point, Sheena and I have always said that we've not been able to share any chocolate yet because we've never met in a room. So often when we meet, we're away to have chocolate or need to have chocolate. So I think that's the first thing we'll do when we get in a room together.
I'm not sure what kind, because I don't know enough yet.
No, I don't know enough yet. No, definitely. So I think really we know that this is a really complex piece of work. So we know that actually we need to break it down into more manageable chunks. We can't just say this is what we're going to do without kind of making it more manageable and coordinated. But I really want to emphasise that actually the work streams that we've identified at this stage have been developed through a co-design process. So everybody has been around the table to determine what our programme structure will look like, and it's an evolving process. So what we have just now could be very different in 6 months to a year's time, or even next week. We're trying to be as very flexible as possible. However, what we've identified through our discussion and our co-design work is that we have got 5 key workstream areas to support our maximising independence journey. Because I think it's really important to highlight that this is a journey for us. This is not, we know that this is going to be an evolving process. So the first one I was just going to cover is entitled Changing the Nature of Care Delivery. So I think essentially we're trying to look at supporting people to access the right services at the right time and in the right place if needed, but also it's more about thinking about how we review and implement a rehab and enablement service, and thinking about how we improve pathways and processes across our adult and older people care services. And again, just picking up on that point around, we need to focus on assets rather than a deficit focus. And Sheena's touched on my nursing experience today, and I have to say I have reflected on this a lot personally around some of the approaches that we perhaps did, particularly when I worked within the acute system as a newly qualified staff nurse, where sometimes at a point of discharge, because somebody was a certain age, we made assumptions that they needed support services put in place and didn't listen actually maybe in full to what the person was telling us, but we were going with the best of intentions and thinking we were doing the best thing, but maybe actually on reflection that shouldn't have been the approach we were taking for everyone. And I think that's something that for our culture, we need to think about how we approach assessment, and across all our access points across a number of across the system is going to be really important about how we change that approach. So that's been a good personal reflection for myself. And I should say that the changing the nature of care delivery is that workshop is being led by Fiona Brown, one of our heads of service. We now move on to the communities work stream, which Ian is chairing. I should just let Ian do a wee spiel about that, but I'm sure he can come in as well. But essentially, this is really about establishing and evaluating community interventions, which we want to design collaboratively and start to look at sharing resources between organisations to reduce cost and maximise impact. So we were really clear when the work streams were being set up that we wanted to make sure that the chairing of these groups and the leadership was spread across the system and not just left for statutory services. So I think that's just an important point to highlight. Our third work stream is maximising wellbeing for independent living, and that's really about assessing and determining the shared wellbeing and health equity actions that we need to look at for adults and older people, and how we connect that across the whole programme of work will be really important as well. So that picks up what I was saying at the beginning about some of these health inequality elements that are really key within Glasgow City. The fourth work stream is workforce and culture, and that's also led by a head of service and one of our head of organisational development as well. We know that actually our workforce will need to needs to be aligned to the maximising independent principles and visions in terms of, the bit I was discussing about assets focused rather than deficit focused approaches. And we need to start to do some work around that as well, and thinking about how we find ways to work together to create that culture change. And that point you were making about language and how we've realised that actually across the organisations that we work, we have completely different language. It's like
we've discovered that in our interactions, haven't we?
That we have.
We have different words, or we might even be using the same words and meaning something different. So it's I describe worlds colliding, but we're not physically colliding, but we're trying to understand each other's approach and background. But thankfully the where we're going is the same.
Exactly. So we recognise that language and obviously behaviours are different as well in organisations as well, so that's going to be important too. So we recognise that that's going to be really important, a work stream. And you could maybe give the update around communication engagement, Sheena, because you chair that, but I can give a quick overview if you'd like. So I suppose we know we need to communicate engage, don't we, in terms of what we're doing, and that's essential, and obviously that's been picked up in the discussions around the review today as well. And what we're trying to do is do something quite different, but we recognise, we know we need to sort of develop a range of tools and methods and resources to engage and empower citizens and to support the workforce, and think about how we involve communities in the work that we're doing. And I think what we've been really clear about is that we want to understand how we better engage with communities on the topic of transforming even health and social care, and just even thinking about finding out what matters to me is really important. And we're looking to explore how we start using storytelling approaches for some of that work. And I know you touched on the We Are Snook research that we're doing. That's really our first phase of engagement, really to start to test some of that language that we've been using to date, but also to make sure that people have a chance to be further engaged in this work as well. So we're really using that as a way in. And we know we've got existing structures for engagement, particularly that are already working well, but we also want to expand and really further test some of these traditional ways that we've engaged. So we are looking at citizens panels or assemblies and exploring participatory action research approaches as well. So these are some of the things that we're developing together in partnership and through collaboration.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsty. And I think that's really key, and that's come really strongly today about that need for collaboration, for working together to make something happen. And we've really seen that within the programme, that it's often harder work, it takes longer. You know, we're bringing different people together with different backgrounds, and of course we all think the way we do it's the best and the right way. Of course, that's a good self-confidence in what we do, but it's about coming together to get the best of what we can all bring. And I think that's the change we want to see. There's loads going on in Glasgow as well in terms of engagement, and we know we've got great examples of that with service user groups, locality forums, you know, the service user experience group that GDA run. It's there's lots of things that are already in place, and I think that I want to make sure people know that we're not suggesting we're starting from zero.
No, absolutely.
We talk a lot about that and make sure we act in the same way, that we're not duplicating work that's already happening, but that we're bringing together that information and that knowledge, and that people's experience is really what we're listening to. And I think that's important. And also really great for me here reading the review that on the board of the National Care Service, you know, carers, people with experience of using services will be contributing in the same way as anyone else. And I think that's really important. I just had a conversation with a community worker this week, and they were talking about how carers or people participating don't have a vote right now within an IJB. So that would be a distinct change, and how we all work with that. I think there's a lot of work in how we support everyone, and why the workforce and culture strand, I think, is so important within this work, because there's a change in dynamic, there's a change in where the power and the authority and the decision making happens. And I think we've been having some of those conversations within this programme, and really trying to work out how we support everyone. Because Annie said it, and I really was sort of cheering, you know, it's really easy to stand on the side and go, well, that's rubbish and that doesn't work, and I could do better than that. When you're actually in there trying to make it work, it's not as easy as it looks.
Oh, definitely not. But I think also what well, I think through our work together and with Ian and others as well, that other colleagues from across the different sectors, is that actually there's a huge recognition that we can't all do this alone. So we need to work together, isn't it? And it's about that it is more than just using the word collaboration. It's actually meaning what we say, rather than actually just using jargon words, which we want to make sure that's really what we're avoiding. We're spending the time, as you say, listening to each other and working together on what we need to do. And I think it is important that, as I said at the beginning, maximising independence isn't about replacing all the really good work that's out there across different parts of the work streams. You know, we talked about the locality engagement groups and other forums as well within GDA, for example. It's about how we connect, but also about how we might look to see what we need to put in place where there's some gaps, but agreeing together what that needs to look like rather than us thinking what it looks like, and also speaking to the community about what they need as well, which is really, really important.
Yeah, and also I think the preventative aspect, that we want to be having those conversations as early as possible. So thinking about some of the work in terms of intergenerational work, you know, this is for adults, but it affects everyone in the community. And I think that's a different way of thinking that for me is really welcome. Yeah, I'm trying to look at if there's anything coming in the chat as we're talking, but I'm not a good multitasker on these things, so I'm going to trust that one of my colleagues pipes up if there's something.
Will tell us. I think one of the things as well that the film there about shared lives, that really, I mean, it was really powerful for a number of reasons, but in particularly thinking about people transitioning through different parts of their journey. And I think you're right, that intergenerational work that we're talking about, a specific element around the maximising wellbeing work, but also thinking we need to be much more mindful about these transition points across the whole system, and how we make that less daunting for people, but also so people don't then end up falling through gaps in that as well, don't we? We need to think about that as well. So that's certainly very much a good reflection today as well, thinking about that within the context of maximising independence.
Yeah, and I think those we've talked a lot recently and are progressing those ideas about people being given space for people to tell their story. And I think we've seen that today, how powerful and actually how simple sometimes, I think as professionals, things can be made more complicated than they actually are. And you know I'm harping on about this all the time about the language. You know, if you need to explain what you've just said, you haven't said it clearly enough. So don't use big words if you don't need to, would be good. That's just my simple approach to life. But
we've got lots of big words, Sheena.
I know we do. And lots of big ideas, which is great. But I think we can unwittingly intimidate or create barriers around the work we do because things are professionalised. And actually, when we hear the stories like today, I loved it, one of the ladies saying, you know, it's like having friends in my sitting room and it gives me a reason to get up in the morning, or a young person talking about feeling safe and feeling loved. And that, you know, these shouldn't be big ideas that we're trying to achieve.
No,
these should be, that's people's right, and I really want to see that change where people do feel safe and valued and cared about at every level. And I think what keeps me going is I see a real commitment to that. Somebody was the other day going, well, in the third sector, we care about people and we want to see good outcomes for people, and that's what gets us up in the morning, and that's why we put up with bad conditions and all the rest of it. And I was reflecting what Annie was saying earlier about, you know, the report says there's great outcomes and good quality within the third sector, but it also recognised people are undervalued. And I thought, well, imagine what we can do when people are valued and everyone's contributing. We can really do something amazing. But also with that quote about what motivates us in the third sector, I think that's what motivates people in statutory and other sectors too. You know, that we are looking for the same thing, but we tend to go about it in a different way, and we think we need to, you know, be on a side to deliver, when actually, you know, I think this review and the work we're doing is starting to, I think we're going to need a lot of support to do it. to really, because it's lovely to say, oh yeah, off you go and just do it and don't compete and collaborate, and that's lovely, but people need to be funded, they need trust in each other, and we need to know that actually the people who are using services need to lead what we're actually doing, because of course we think we can have good ideas, but it needs to be what's right for the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we all need support with that, because that's a huge change. It's not a huge change for someone like me who's worked in services in the third sector, but it's a huge change for lots of different structures, and that's my learning in this programme, understanding just what a change it's going to be and how we support that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Lynn.
Pop in here just to say there's a question popped up around all this discussion, Kirsty.
Yeah.
Right. It's from Fiona Purchase, who's also a carer and used to work in social work. So she's got
right, okay.
So hello, Fiona. She talks about some of the issues around culture change you were discussing and different ways of working.
Yeah.
She says, maybe you want to comment on that, both of you, is that she wonders if there's not enough done to target people at the top of structures.
Yeah.
They're committed to driving forward organisational change.
Yeah.
Needs to be done, and should training be targeted more to people at different levels in organisations and at the highest levels so they don't miss out? Just a thought, she says.
Yeah. Can I go first, Kirsty?
You go first. You go first, yes.
I think that is such an important point, and something that you know, I'd flagged up right at the start about this. You know, great, we've got really senior people leading this programme of work, but that means those people are very used to directing, leading, needing to be leading from the front, if you like, and deciding and making decisions. And I think this programme is really switching that around, that the decision making, and it's more of a listening than directing and a supporting rather than leading. And I think that's a really huge change, and something that I suppose we're just starting to explore within the programme. And although there's a commitment to it, it can feel uncomfortable for people. Like we've seen it in some of our work. We're used to getting on and doing the work, not sitting pondering it and working out who needs to be there and have we got all the right people, and we're just used to getting on with it and having that pressure to perform, if you like. And I think that really changing the culture and the people feeling valued and contributing and still as useful whilst letting go of some of that power and authority is really significant, I think. And I think I hear a lot of people talking about wanting to be valued and equal, and I don't really know how we achieve that when so much of the decision making is about, is your project going to be here next month or next year? Because funding's so much caught up in that power dynamic, and carers and service users talk about that as well. They're scared to talk about something in case they lose the service they've got, even if they don't like it, you know. So I think there's a whole lot to be done on that issue. That's not answering the question, probably, other than how important it is. Sorry.
No, I think it is an important point that Fiona raises, and I think I totally agree with what you've said. I think all I would add to that is that we very much recognise that actually there needs to be a complete culture shift to be able to deliver what we are hoping maximise, or what we would like maximising independence to achieve. What I would say is we have actually got some external support to work across the leadership teams to help us on that journey, recognising, and this is kind of a strapline I've been saying all along, is that actually to deliver something different, we need to all be different and do things differently. And you're right, Sheena, that is going to take some time to be able to do that, because and that shift in power will feel uncomfortable, and there will be discomfort, and we have to acknowledge and accept that. So we have got some support to help us do that, because we recognise that maybe us just doing that internally won't also be as objective as it could be. So we've got some critical friends, as we're calling them, to help us with that, because we recognise how important it is. So we're not there yet, but we recognise there needs to be a shift at all levels across the organisation.
Yeah, and I think within that, that's also, you mentioned it earlier about who the membership is of the work that we're doing. You know, there's third sector partners, there's health and social care partners, there's workforce development people to support the work. We're engaging in the research with the people who use services and the groups where they're represented and carers, and having that discussion about how at the earliest point, so should they be part of the work streams, for example, or how are we going to continue that engagement? And that's the hope from the research, that people, and my hope for today and tomorrow, people might identify themselves as wanting to be involved in this work.
Yeah.
Because we really, and I know the two of us talk about this a lot, and want to make sure that we're not just talking about it, but it's meaningful and purposeful, and that we are prepared. And I have examples already where I know people are ready for it, that we're prepared to have some of those uncomfortable conversations where we have to listen that, yes, we're good people and we want to do the best, but do you know what? It doesn't always work for people. And some people have horrendous experience trying to get through everyday life.
Yeah.
And we agree that's not good enough, but we need to listen and really, support each other with those uncomfortable conversations, because a lot of it's not pretty for people.
No, absolutely. And also, I think it was important just to say that we did have carers as part of the co-design process around the agreeing the workstream areas of focus, as well as third and voluntary sector reps, but also representation from the independent sector as well, because housing partners and others are really important to be part of that discussion as well, because we know that has a huge impact in people's lives too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of our time. Are we to keep going, or
no? I think that takes you to roughly when we thought we would finish, folks. So unless you or Kirsty have any last words that you particularly want
have we
to
got
emphasize?
any other questions, or are we?
I think the only other question I saw there was about you know, people who draw on services being represented there, and I think you've covered that. But if there's anything else that you or Kirsty want to say on it.
No, I think just that if people do want to be involved, you know, I know Lynn summarises beautifully whenever we have an event, and there'll be contacts available for people. There's a bit of discussion about language that I see, and I think that is absolutely very important, and it's the reason I said at the start that I'm seeing it's maximising independence right now, but we know that that's a big, the language is really important, and what it means to people is really important. So we will, you know, consider that. But I think it's also really important that we act, and that we recognise the motivation is right, and that it's with respect, and also that everything's not going to be, you know, we're going to make mistakes along the way, and we have to constantly review and improve as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And the research from We Are Snook will be fundamental in terms of what we end up calling this, because we understand that independence means different things to different people. So we're just using it as a working title just now.
Yeah.
Just to emphasise that last point.
Yeah. Great, and thank you, Kirsty, for coming, having the conversation.
Thanks, Sheila.
There's many more to come. Thank you. And thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you both very much for that. That was really helpful as part of what I think was a really positive discussion, some really good speakers. So thank you to them. Again, people, if I can ask you to use the nice little reaction buttons to thank Kirsty and Sheena, that would be great. The agenda has me summing up, and I haven't got a clue how to sum up what has been a really broad-ranging and insightful set of contributions. So I'm not going to try to. I think what we've heard has been some really valuable insights. I am hugely struck by some of the things that different contributors have made, and in particular, actually, you know, listening to people who currently receive and draw on social care, talking about what's important to them and what works for them, has been really valuable. I think we all have a lot of work ahead of us across sectors, across agencies, and across communities, if we're going to come up with models that are better for the future. We're all going to have to adapt and think about what that means. And some of Annie's points about, you know, taking the organisation hat off and coming around the table and thinking about what's right is going to be really critical for all of us. So thank you everyone for joining us today. A reminder, this is in 2 parts. So tomorrow we have further inputs, and a quick reminder in case you haven't picked up on it, that we start 15 minutes earlier tomorrow. We've rejigged that slightly to enable Gillian Barclay from Scottish Government to join us. So we will start tomorrow at 1:15. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely evening. Take care.